For these people, we need to cut red tape and maintaining my foremost priority, which is keeping Canadians safe. So that's why this bill has part that are strengthening the system and our firearms, but are also cutting into red tape.
That was Public Safety Minister Stephen Blaney last week announcing changes to firearms laws here in Canada. Blaney is now facing off with two provincial chief firearms officers, people who are calling the Conservatives' proposed reforms into question. But in a recent turn of events, an old photo has resurfaced of PEI's Chief Firearms Officer Vivian Hayward, which now has some gun owners calling for her resignation. Ms. Hayward was recently in hot water over a comment she made regarding the government's plans to table new gun laws. Sun News's Bryn Weiss joins me now from studio in Toronto. Bryn, you know, I want to get to that poster in a minute, but let's talk about the fact that Vivian Hayward, who is charged with enforcing the laws passed by Parliament, is out there commenting on them and criticizing them before she's even seen them. I mean, I'm not sure that these people should be questioning laws that they're supposed to enforce when they've seen them, but she, in ignorance, is questioning the law.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Brian. It didn't take very long for Vivian Hayward or some other CFOs, actually, in other provinces to come out with comments on these proposed changes, even really before they understood what the federal government was talking about. In Hayward's case, she was talking about the change that's going to make it easier for law-abiding restricted gun owners to transport their firearms safely and as still within all of the transport rules that are attached to that license. But she was commenting on that change in particular, saying that it was going to lead to, and I'm quoting her here, a U.S. style which would allow people to walk around with guns on their hips. That's just not the case. And yesterday...
No, okay, and so before we get to Blaney's office, let's point out what we're talking about. You've got a license to own a gun, to purchase a gun, and until right now, you still have to, until these changes come into effect, you still have to get what's called an authorization to transport. I call it a hall pass that lets you take your gun that you're licensed to own from your home to the range you're licensed to go to.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And as it is right now, Brian, if you are a member of a range, you would have one authorization to transport to that range. Now, if you wanted to go to a gunsmith, say, to have some work done on that firearm, you'd need to apply for a different authorization to transport.
They're rarely refused, are they?
Yeah, oh, they're never refused, and they sit in a cabinet somewhere and no one ever looks at them. This is some of that paperwork burden that firearms owners have been talking about for quite some time. But what's important to point out here, Brian, is that even with this change, even with the Common Sense Firearms Act that the federal government is proposing, there would still be an authorization to transport, but it would be attached to your restricted gun license. So you would still have to abide by all of the rules as they stand now for authorizations to transport. The difference is you would only need one to move your gun around within your home province.
So you would be allowed to go to your range, you'd be allowed to go to your gunsmith.
Exactly.
Things like that. But, you know, you can't be driving around with it just because you're going for groceries.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And that's the point that Blaney's office was making when they criticized Vivian Hayward yesterday. They said, look, she's fear-mongering. And I want to quote you here from Blaney's office, Brian. Here's what Jean-Christophe Delarue had to say about this. Quote, law-abiding firearms owners are sick and tired of harassment by unelected, unaccountable provincial firearms officers. Admitting she knows very little about the proposed changes, the CFO for PEI nevertheless alleged it's just basically one step away from the U.S. style having the gun on their hip. This official is wrong, and if she had taken a moment to examine our government's proposals, she would have seen clearly that there are no changes to safe transport requirements. That's from Blaney's office, and that's the point they're making. She didn't look at the changes. She simply, you know, shot from the hip, to use the term, about her thoughts on this change.
I think she did, and it's not her first time being fast and loose with rules, regulations, and so on. Let's bring that poster back up. Because this came out a few years ago. I believe it was back in 2010. That's Vivian Hayward at the back there. That is a truck filled with prohibited and restricted firearms, and it says wanted, guns, or else. Or else what? There's the implicit threat there that they're out to seize your guns. But Bryn, this is a pickup truck in a strip mall in PEI filled with guns that are not safely stored, that are not being safely transported. If you or I tried to do that at a gun show, let's say that we were licensed gun dealers and we showcased a firearm like that, we could face jail time from people like Vivian Hayward.
That's exactly right, Brian. Minimum 3-year jail sentence, let's be clear. And some of those guns in that pickup truck, Brian, are prohibited firearms. That's an MP5 fully automatic rifle in one of the hands of the people in that picture.
With her finger on the trigger?
With her finger on a trigger. If you or I stood in our driveway with an MP5 without a trigger lock on it, it wasn't locked in a gun case, and we were holding it like that, you and I would be in some serious trouble. And that's why, just today, the National Firearms Association, looking at this photo, looking at all of Vivian Hayward and what she's been doing, they're calling for her resignation. They're saying she has to go because, look, this photo shows her and her staff breaking so many firearms laws. We all bound by the same laws, they say, and she needs to go. And in fact, I talked to Sean Bevins just earlier today. He says not only should she be sacked, but also criminal charges should be brought against them, as they would be if this was anyone else other than a CFO.
Unfortunately, I think she's the one that would have to lay those charges, so I doubt that's going to happen. But I think the CFO position should just be gone. We're out of time just about, but I want to ask you quickly. Quebec, their chief firearms officer, they're having their own issue. They've decided, well, sure, the federal government says you can use these CZ rifles and these Swiss Arms Classics, the ones that the RCMP banned, turn people into criminals overnight. The feds say you can use them, and Quebec's chief firearms officer still says no.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Brian. It didn't take very long for Quebec's CFO to issue a statement saying no range in Quebec is permitted to allow prohibited firearms. And let's remember, even with this amnesty in place, those Swiss Arms and CZ rifles are still technically prohibited. And so the point that the Quebec CFO is trying to make is you may well be allowed to drive around with them, I guess, but you can't take them to a range because no range is permitted to allow prohibited firearms. And this is why, of course, gun owners are saying the amnesty doesn't go far enough. They really want those guns to be reclassified back to what they were before the RCMP reclassified them as prohibited, either non-restricted or restricted depending on the barrel length. Some gun groups, Brian, are saying that's the only way that you'll allow owners of these rifles, who've owned them legally for 10 years before the change came about, to take them to ranges as they would have done before so.
You know what all of this shows, Bryn? Some good moves by the feds last week, but still more work to be done, including firing a lot of CFOs. Good talking to my friend. We'll chat soon.
Yep. Thanks, Brian.